All right, everybody. Welcome to the alt stage where all the cool kids are. That's right. If you're here, welcome to the cool kids stage. Our first talk is going to be from Lorenzo, who works at Formidable, and he's a really cool dude. I'm excited to hear this talk. A few years ago, I think he somehow exploded onto the scene of React and React Native. And he hasn't stopped since. And so, as of right now, he maintains open source. He helps people at Facebook and is an all around awesome dude. Please bang your virtual hands together for Lorenzo and his first talk. The 1.0 is a lie.
Welcome everyone. I'm so glad to be here talking with you all. And today I'm gonna talk to you about something that is really near dear to my heart and to probably most of you React Native developers. So let's jump right into it. I'm Lorenzo. You may know me as Calset. I'm a software engineer at Formidable for the UK office in London, where I live. I'm a React Native core maintainer, which is maybe why you may know about me. And I'm also an organizer for Provided As Is, which is a meetup here in London for open source maintainers, which I jokingly usually call group therapy for maintainers. You see, today I want to talk about releases, but I want to make sure that we start with the right foot. So to give you a bit of context, I've been a developer in React Native using React Native for the last 3 years almost. So I've been around since version 30, more or less. And I've been a releaser since version 57. That one you see over there, in particular, is my first ever release. This to say that I've been around quite a while, but please just make sure to remember that this talk is from my experience, my point of view. So don't take anything I say as official. Also, I want to know about you. I know we have a chat going on. I'm going to read all your answers and your comments while doing the presentation, but please let me know which version you've been using, like since how long have you been around for React Native. Like, it's really interesting usually to know how far back we can go. Sometimes people are even from version 20. And also remember that if you have any questions for me, we have a Q&A after this, and we have a speaker's room, and there's also an advice lounge. So there's plenty of time to ask me anything that comes to your mind while seeing this presentation. So let's dive into releases. And the first bit that I want to talk about is, why do we do releases? It sounds quite simple, right? We want to provide somehow our code to other people so that they can use it, right? It's not just that. Like, technically, when you expose your code on GitHub, for example, the package.json npm allows you to technically point to any given repository without the need of a strict release in the npm registry. But we do releases, we do versioning because we want to introduce a level of staticness. We want to say, okay, this is a version, this is a version of the code, this is a package that I've decided is good enough for it to be given out as a sort of a unit, like it's that. And also, like, this is one of the reasons why, like, the dynamic dependencies, the use of the Carre for some dependencies, I don't really like that. I prefer like strict staticness. And why I like that? Because it allows reproducibility. So in particular in the mobile world, I really want to minimize the possibility for me to not be able to get to the point in time, to that snapshot precise for that code. So like, for example, if I need to test the previous version of the app I released, I need to make sure that the code and every single piece of code I'm using, or as the most part, as much as I can control, is precisely the same so that I can work on it. That said, how do we release? To sort of like tackle this question, I've decided to go for some examples. So let's start with a simple one. Calset.dev is my website, and it's awful. please, please, please don't look at it. It's ugly. You're gonna hate me for going there. So don't hate me. Just trust that it exists. The way I release this is usually I just do a commit, I push it up on GitHub, then there's a Git hook that gets triggered, and that leads Netlify to do its magic, and then the code is ready, it's out there, it's released, and it rides into the sunset. Now, of course, this is really simple. Let's try to go for a better one, for one that comes from my past, in my experience. This is potentially an app I worked on. I don't want to say too much about it, but basically we had a bunch of commits. Whenever we wanted to do a new release, we do a branch from master. We generate a tag on this new branch. We push this up, and we have a CI tool that runs a series of triggers that are getting triggered by this tag. And then once it's all green and it's all done, we have an app ready to be bundled, ready to be sent to the source, where the users can download it and ride into the sunset. And now React Native, this is the hard example. So we run a script and it just goes into the sunset. Yeah, okay, of course, that's not it, right? Yeah, of course it's not. Like, this is the real pipeline for releasing a version of React Native. Probably you're not able to read all the steps, and don't worry, it's fine. This is just to showcase how much work goes into one or like any given React Native release that we do currently. In particular, this is what we've used for 62, and also I had to squash together some steps in order to make it readable. One thing in particular that I want to point out is that the step I was showing you earlier is actually over there. It's one of them, but it's really, really far ahead, and there's a lot else going on. And I'm pretty sure that right now what you're asking yourself is, why is that complicated? Like, what's that complexity? And I can sort of like tackle two different series of complexities. The first kind is actually related to a series of things that happen in any sort of like medium to big open source project. Like, these are generic complexities that most of us doing open source may face. For example, the fact that you care about the community. It may sound weird, but basically, whenever you care about your community, whenever you do a release, you want also to produce the material so that so that your developers, the developers using your library, can actually, consume it well. So in React Native in particular, where we feel strongly about it, we have the changelog blog post. We do diffs so that upgrade helper can show what you need to do. We have the documentation and a lot of other things. And also we do a lot of manual testing because, like, yes, we trust CI, but also we don't. So we do manual testing a lot. Also, the code base moves really, really fast. In particular, in React Native, we have around 400 commits landing every month, which makes, it's a challenge to keep up with that pace. And in particular, talking about code moving fast, since React Native depends on React, for example, depends on the Android and iOS ecosystems, we also need to keep moving fast enough so that we can catch up to all these other libraries. Like, it may sound trivial, like, oh, well, React, you just need to bump the version library, right? Well, not really. For React Native to use a specific version of React, it needs to have a sync commit where some manual work is involved. And I left there an example. But talking about React Native specific complexities, I've sort of like tackled two in this slide. One, which is probably the one there's most misconception around, is that Facebook is the owner of React Native, but the community manages the releases. And this is something that, and I'll talk a bit more about it later, like it's been improving, but Facebook internally, but it's a mirror of the code they have in their monorepo. when a person from the React Native team does a commit internally, then that gets replicated into the master branch of the open source version without going through the standard PR procedure. It doesn't go through the same CI. So sometimes, because the CI internal and the CI external are different, sometimes the CI external may break. And also, Facebook can always have the last word or the last say, or they can, decide something about release, and we have to keep up with these new requirements. Also, because as I mentioned, the code base moves fast and the release process goes through branches. So we do per each stable release, we do a branch. Sometimes it's hard to do patch releases. So if let's say 6.2.1, we wanted to pick a commit, but this commit landed, let's say 2 months after the point in which we cut the branch, commit and reapply it into a branch may lead to conflicts. So that introduces a bit of complexity. So as I mentioned, while there are these complexities, in particular the Facebook aspect, it's improving. It's improving a lot, and I'm going to mention a bit more about it in a bit. But now let's review those steps. As I was saying, a lot of work, a lot of iterations, a lot of steps that we do here are not strictly because of the code, but because we care. As you can see, all the yellow, it's all things that we do for generating community-related material. So the documentation, the blog post, the diffs for the upgrade helper, and also there's a lot of manual testing that we do to ensure that, we can trust the CI, but also that we are reliably seeing the code behaving. You see, all of this is because, and this kind of started even before this comment, but this comment really highlighted the problem around React Native releases, and has really left the whole set of people working around this issue with the constant question in the back of our mind of how do we solve this problem. And I think that the easier answer to this is that we solve what we can and we work around what we can't. As I just mentioned, it's really complicated, so it's not like we can actually tackle every single problem. For example, when it comes to solving, one thing that we have done, which has been quite useful, is the introduction of our RC phase, as we call it. And some of you may be like, oh yeah, we've been doing that forever. No, actually, the first time we did it was version 60, which even I was confused. I was like, oh no, we should have done that even way before that. But also, the reason why we started doing that is so that we could increase the ways that each release is tested before getting to 0.0 and make sure that the code is stable and all the major regressions are caught before that. Also, we've introduced more people to the process. When I started doing this, it was basically just Mike, then I joined him, and usually it was either me or him, and then we got either Charpeni or Hector Ramos to help us for the website and the documentation part. But now, and it's so refreshing and it's so nice to see, we have at least 4 to 5 people constantly involved in every release, and there are even more that are more drive-by. They do one thing, they help, and then they sort of go back to do what they were mostly focused on. And also, as I mentioned already before, there's a really good increase in communication with Facebook lately. It's not just a general thing, it's also thanks to Eloy from the Microsoft team, as I already just mentioned, and every other member from the Facebook team really stepped up. Eli in particular has been a big proponent of this new level of communication, as this issue highlights. He opened this issue about 63, which is a version that has not even been cut in terms of branching, and it's incredible because he took the time to already tell us what's going to happen in that version, what work is required, and some dates around it, which is incredible. Like, to me, seeing this new level of involvement, it's really heartwarming, and I can see this increasing more and more over time. Talking about workarounding though, like for example, we are quite sure that, it's never gonna get to the point of an upgrade being a one-line script. There are a couple in the CLI that over time, over the past few years, that have tried to go for that route, but in our experience, they never actually fully support or like leave your code base clean after being run. And that's why we've created the Upgrade Helper, which is a web app, and I really hope that you all know what it is by this point. It's been around for a couple of versions, and the new Upgrade Support repo. And they are both ways for the community to come together and to help each other out in upgrading from a version to another. And also we are aware that we cannot fully automate the complete process of releasing, which is why we incrementally iterate on this process on the bullet point list. Like, it's never been that list from the start. That's a progress, that's a work that we started back then and it's still improving right now. Like, for example, Eloy is doing right now another PR to improve the script that we use for end-to-end testing manually when we do the branching and the testing locally. And also Lucas has been doing some great work for the Upgrade Helper. They are planning now to basically make the whole part of generating new divs completely automatic. So again, it's a constant process of improvement over what we cannot solve completely. So to sum it up, releasing React Native, I hope at this point I've convinced you, it's really complicated. The code base moves really, really fast, and everyone involved is actively working to improve it, to improve the experience, not just releasing it, but also the actual release and the experience for everyone consuming React Native, so that everyone can have a better experience with it. And again, it's not just people from the community, it's the Facebook team and the Microsoft teams that have been collaborating a lot and collaborating way more into this open source aspect of it, which makes things really, really reassuring. But that said, let's go back to the title of my talk in a way. I'm pretty sure that by this point you're like, yeah, sure, okay, it's complicated, but wouldn't 1.0 be the final solution? Wouldn't having a version 1.0 fix all my problems? Like, should I wait for 1.0 to use React Native in production? And to that, my answer is a clear no. Let me explain. So you see, 1.0 per se is just semantics. 1.0 is a promise. It's a promise of having a finalized product. So like, okay, that square, now it's complete, and it's a square that I can promise is gonna work the way it should. It's the way I envisioned it. And also, it's kind of bringing with it a promise of long-term support. Like, we're not used too much to have, many major releases one after the other, in particular for bigger pieces of software without like massive breaking changes. And usually we would expect, the major to be supported for a long time. But that said, 1.0 doesn't mean that the product is not usable. Like, simply because 1.0 is not there doesn't mean React Native cannot be used. Like, take Gmail. Like, let's go in a completely other realm. Let's talk about a piece of software that has been around for a really long time. Probably most of you don't remember this, but like, when it was released for the public, it actually was still in beta. Like, you had the Gmail logo with the beta label, and it stayed in that way for 5 years. And why is that? Well, because that label was there to say, hey folks, we're still working on it. We're still tweaking it and adding new things, which is sort of what's happening with React Native. So are we doomed? Like, since we don't get 1.0, should we never use React Native in production? I hope that by this point, you kind of already know where I'm going with my answer, but the answer, of course, is heck no. Like, React Native is already vastly usable. Like, it's been successfully used all around the world. So many companies have used it successfully. Of course, not everyone, but hundreds and hundreds have And I've been a React Native developer for 3 to 4 years right now, and all the projects I've worked on are still there, are still around, still kicking, and I'm still really sure that it's been the right bet for those projects. Also, as you may be aware, there's a long-term plan actually in place now, which is the new architecture of React Native. And in particular, I'm going to say this, let's keep it a secret between us, basically, but we're talking already with Facebook about how we should handle releasing one of the first pieces of the new architecture in the future, and we are trying to create a roadmap for it. So there's a long-term plan. We're already acting on it, and we're trying to make it sure that it's the least breaking experience possible for everyone. So, you can rest assured that we are constantly trying to improve. So as I was mentioning, to close it off altogether, the release process is complicated, but for good reasons. React Native is still moving, and everyone is still constantly improving. No one is standing still. And 1.0, 1.0.0 is still far away for React Native. So yeah, basically 1.0 is a lie, and you can just have fun using React Native right now. I want to thank you all for sticking around, listening to this conversation. I hope that you enjoyed learning a bit more about the releases. My contacts are over there. You can reach out to me at my Twitter account. My DMs are open. I have an email address over there. And if you're watching this live, now we are going to have a Q&A, and then there's going to be a speaker room, and then there's an advanced lounge. So if you have any extra questions, please ask me over there. And I'm going to post the slides on my Twitter quite soon. Thank you for staying around.
Awesome. Well, wow. We've all learned a bit there. So, Lorenzo, will you please join me on stage for some Q&A? Hi, Lorenzo.
Hey, hey, Gant. I'm so glad that I have to speak with you a bit. It's been such a long time since the last we've met each other.
I know. Actually, when was the first time that we met? Because we've been in the React Native circles for so long.
Yeah,
I think it was.
I think the first time in person it was at the first React Native Europe.
Yes,
conference,
2017.
Yeah, and you sort of pushed me to try and do open source for React Navigation. I think that was
don't put it on me.
You're kind of to blame. You're kind of to blame for me doing open source, because then for React Navigation, I started doing React Native open source, and here we are.
That's perfect. If anybody ever says, Gant, what the hell do you do? I'll be like, no. Take a look at Lorenzo. That's awesome.
Push people.
Push people. Nah, that's been fantastic.
It's the greatest part. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's I really do like the React Native community because we stay so connected. We see each other quite often. There's only 2 or 3 conferences where we get to actually see each other. So I'm pretty happy that we get to do that. Let's talk a little bit about some of the stuff that you talked about. I know you'd mentioned that there's some additional steps to the roadmap that would be necessary. We're talking about turbo modules and such. Could you elaborate a little bit more on the additional steps that you were referring to in your video?
Yeah. So basically, I don't want to say too much because it's still a moving process. But as I was saying in the slides, basically, we are this 2020, for it being like this crazy year already. At least when it comes to React Native releases, it seems like we're getting better at organizing a roadmap. And for the first time ever, we sort of have we're having a conversation with the team from Facebook and the team from Microsoft about what the next releases should look like. Because in the past, what happened was that we did a release, then as soon as the 0.0 of a version was out, we would cut the branch for the next one. And we sort of like just went by sort of like inertia. Like it was just like, oh, we've cut .0, so we can create a new branch. Now, for the first time I think, at least from since I've joined, like we're actually saying, okay, what we're gonna do now, what are we gonna do with the next release, and what we're gonna do in the next 6 to 8 months, and it's really refreshing and really interesting, because having like an end goal, which again, it's as you were sort of mentioning, it's related to the new architecture, to turbo modules, which should be the first step of the new architecture landing actually in open source land in a release. Like we are working backwards from there. Like we know that we want to get there, but we are now having a proper conversation of like, okay, so we want to make this happen. What are the things that need to happen before that? And based on that answer, we're figuring out how many releases we have to do. And it's great to have a plan. You know, it's weird. It's really, really good. And like I feel that 62 has been probably like one of the hardest releases that we've done like in the last couple of years, because of so many changes in native land.
Yeah.
And with this roadmap, we are trying to prevent this from happening ever again. Like 62 is the last one without a proper plan ahead. So I know we are like Mike and Alloy already cut the 63. I think the .0 RC is already out, by the way. I'm not sure, but like I know at least the branch exists. And yeah, I mean, if anyone has been like burnt or like was like, oh my God, it was so good, and then we did 62, and 62 was again a really complicated upgrade. Like I can assure you that we're doing the best that we can to make sure that 63, 64, and the other releases are going to be, you know, a smoother process that will lead to, you know, a great experience, and also like a better code base with, you know, the new architecture and stuff.
Yeah, I think that's definitely palpable, that it's gone from a reactive sort of setup to a long-term viewpoint of where things need to go and how to like kind of get all these pieces working together. We actually, that might tie into a question that an audience member has. Does Facebook use the same steps in their release procedures? So people are always interested in what Facebook's doing.
So I think I've shared the link in the Slack, but just for everyone understanding, basically Dan Abramov a few days ago in the umbrella issue about suspense and the release cycle for suspense, as written really, really well, what's the approach for Facebook when they think they consider about releasing code. And it's basically in two parts. So the first part is that Facebook has all its code in a monorepo. And what that means is that everything is constantly, like, is immediately available. It's not like they write some code and then they need to do a release to consume it internally, like they consume it straight away. And also they take the burden of having experimental code in production, because it allows them to move quicker, like more quickly, and also like for them to detect more bugs, more issues straight away in, like, let's say in 3 months instead of 2 years. So when it comes to Facebook, they first try to see what happens with their code in their production. So in that sense, they don't really have a release cycle. But when it comes to open source, for React Native in particular, again, now it's more of a conversational. It's like, okay, internally, we're planning this. We want to get this point by this time frame. How can we make this happen? And now the question is also like, how can we make this happen so that the community will still enjoy using React Native? Like, we know that this is ahead. We know that this is going to be a breaking change. How can we make sure that the process goes smoothly and everyone feels like they've been, taken by their hand and moved across all these steps?
Yeah, I think that it's definitely a wider viewpoint, and they've definitely changed the process a bit, because you and I probably remember the days of sending in a pull request and then it just being like, nope.
Yeah.
Fortunately, that doesn't happen, I don't think, at all anymore. There's a lot of conversation. The community is really good about talking about merging what Facebook needs with what we need as well. It's a lot of growth, and a lot of it thanks very much to you, by the way. And also at the same time, open source, mental health. I know those are great things that you like to talk about. I think we're out of time for the Q&A because there's a session starting in the main area. But if you want to talk about any of these things, more speaking with Lorenzo, by the way, you could spend a lot of time talking with him. It's going to be exciting. But if you have a paid ticket, I believe you can go talk to him in a Q&A room. And so definitely take advantage of that. Reach out to him on all the socials, follow, make sure that you're getting all the updates. It's good source of information. Lorenz, thank you so much for coming in and giving us a talk and doing some. Yeah, and sorry that our time got cut short. Great, everybody. I'll see y'all in a little bit. We're going to take a little break, and then we'll be back once the main room is done.
Bye.
We are happy to kick this back off. Hopefully, the streams are working great for everybody out there. I'd just like to say this isn't possible without the fantastic gold sponsors. So I'd like to mention two of those sponsors right now, starting off with Mux. Mux is a powerful API to video and performance monitoring platform founded by the creators of the biggest open source video player, Video.js. Mux makes beautiful video possible for every development team. And then additionally, we're going to say thank you to another gold sponsor, Hasura. Hasura is an open source engine that connects you to your databases and microservices and auto-generates real-time GraphQL APIs instantly. So two fantastic sponsors. Please show them some love and support, even if you're quasi-interested in checking out what they do. Mention them on Twitter. Be sure to use the React Summit hashtag and let everybody know that you appreciate them. And with that, we're going to get into some lightning talks. Now, the way this is going to be set up is you're going to be checking out some great talks. We're going to be seeing Sangeetha, Alloy, Trevor Brindle, Harris. We're going to see some really cool stuff. And then all those fantastic people will be live for our Q&A session so that we can check that out. Please give our virtual speakers a round of applause. And please welcome to the stage our first lightning talk.
Hello, everyone. I am delighted to talk to you all about the topic machine learning on the edge. I am Sangeetha, and I work as a developer at Amazon. For the past 4 years or so, I've been building mobile applications professionally and as side projects. Naturally, I'm always on the lookout for ways to make apps faster, smarter, more secure, and be able to deliver better customer experiences. As such, when Google rolled out MLKit as part of their I/O, which promised of machine learning on the edge, I had to check it out. Now, what is ML on the edge and why should one care about it? Traditionally, building ML solutions required developers to gather data, build models, train them, tune them, deploy them to some remote server on the cloud, and have it served to mobile devices on so-called the edges of the internet. Now, as we all know, with the passage of time, mobile devices have only grown much more efficient in their computing abilities. Why don't we leverage the computing capacity of the devices locally instead of doing the processing somewhere remote on the cloud? That is ML on the edge. Now, what are the benefits of doing so? Not having to transfer data back and forth across the globe means easy latency and bandwidth wins. Localizing all of the processing happening on the device means the data is more secure, the results are more real-time, and you are able to provide better offline-first experience to your customers. And finally, this greatly reduces the barrier for any mobile developer with little to no ML expertise to integrate ML solutions in their applications. Hopefully, you all are sold now on the idea that ML on the edge is interesting and are curious to know more about it. Now let's try to understand how do we go about achieving this. MLKit is Google's SDK, which encompasses all of their machine learning expertise in a simple yet powerful SDK. This is built on top of TensorFlow Lite, which is a mobile-optimized version of TensorFlow and can be used for both Android and iOS development. Now, the APIs that MLKit offers can be broadly classified into two types, base and custom. The idea is that if one of your needs is not satisfied by the available base APIs, then you're free to build your own TensorFlow Lite models custom and have it rendered on mobile devices. The available base APIs can be further classified based on their usage into vision and language. For example, smart replies, barcode scanning, face detection, image detection and labeling, and so on. Again, mobile developers need not necessarily understand the machine learning magic that happens under the hood. All of that is cleanly abstracted away from you and is available as out-of-the-box APIs, which can be leveraged with just a few lines of code. Talking about code, next let's understand what it takes to integrate MLKit in a React Native project. We need to know that MLKit can be used for both native and React Native development. But for the purpose of this talk, I'll be focusing on React Native workflow for Android, but the process should be pretty similar for iOS as well. The first step for integrating MLKit is setting up your project as a Firebase one. Now, Firebase provides a set of tools that makes application development very easy. Tools such as logging, authentication, all of these heavy lifting process is available as part of Firebase. So the developers at Google thought, why should machine learning be any different? And that's why MLKit is available as part of Firebase as well. In order to get started with Firebase, you go to the Firebase console and give in your package name. This generates a Firebase configuration file, which is placed in the root of your project folder. Next, we update the build.gradle file to declare Google services as one of our dependencies and execute the plugin. This enables us to use Firebase products in our project. With Firebase setup, let's move to the React Native section of the codebase. React Native Firebase is the officially recommended library for Firebase for React Native development. To use this, we first install the React Native Firebase app module using either npm or yarn. Followed by this, based on our use case, we install the required model. In this case, I'm installing the ML Vision model and updating my firebase.json file to enable true. Now for the fun part. With Firebase hooked up and the required ML models installed, we use the APIs to process on our input. In this case, I'm awaiting the download of the Vision model, followed by which I provide the path to my local image to the text recognizer process image API. What this does is process the image and return an array of text blocks for each text on that image. Each of this text block contains information such as what is the actual text within it, what are the bounds of it, what are the coordinates, and what is the language of the text. This is in action. We see that walk on the grass has been accurately determined, and the different text blocks in the output have been used to overlay on top of the image. This is another example of MLKit's face detection API. Here I have given the image and it has been able to accurately determine the face contours and give its coordinates. Consider this as a stepping point for applying filters on this or generating avatars for this image and so on. The possibilities are simply endless. Now, that is pretty much what I wanted to cover as part of this talk. Today we learned what is machine learning on the edge, what are its benefits, what is MLKit, and what does it take to integrate MLKit as part of your React Native project. I hope to have inspired you with the thought of using ML on the edge on your next mobile application. If you have any questions, feel free to drop me a DM on my Twitter or drop me a mail. Thank you so much for watching. Bye-bye.
Hi folks, my name is Haris Mahmood. I'm a senior engineer at Shopify based in Toronto, Canada. I work specifically on the client team on the Arrive app. It's an app that helps keep track of all of your online orders. I also run an online store called Repit Supply, which sells apparel, pins, stickers, and accessories for developers and other tech enthusiasts. So today we'll be chatting about styles and theming in React Native from the perspective of the Arrive app and the experiences that I gained while working on the app. The Arrive app is 95% React Native, with the remaining portions relying on a couple of native modules for both iOS and Android. I'll be talking about some of the main problems that we faced when it came to theming and styling for the app, and how our Restyle library helps solve those problems. The first issue that we came across revolved around managing colors. Colors are notoriously hard to name, they're hard to keep track of, they became super hard to maintain as more and more colors got added, or old colors need to be adjusted to meet changing needs for the app. The second issue revolved around managing font styles. First of all, like we had far too much code duplication throughout the app. We needed to write down multiple different style declarations for every single text component that we had in our app. This required far too much code all over the place and became super hard to manage. One of the first things we did there was to just try and simplify this, is to build out a font styles object that defines some of our default font styles, and then implement those and use those as necessary for the different text components throughout our app. This worked okay, but we started to run into issues when, for example, we'd have a new font style that was exactly the same as one that existed, but had one small change. So we weren't sure whether we needed to introduce a brand new font style or use the font style that we already have with one override. And the second problem that we had was trying to figure out then how broad or specific the font styles needed to be. Was body far too generic? Was call to action far too specific? In the latter scenario, if we came across a situation where we needed to use the exact same font style that call to action already implemented, but it was for something that wasn't a call to action, we didn't know whether we needed to refactor the entire code base to accommodate a renamed call to action font style, or just use it as is and kind of deal with the awkward consequences of losing some of that consistency. Dark mode and theming is obviously a huge portion of mobile apps, and we knew that we wanted to implement and tackle dark mode, but we already had a number of issues with regards to themes, with regards to colors and font styles, and the thought of adding more colors and more font style alternatives just didn't seem like the right approach when we already had problems that we were trying to figure out. So this is sort of where Restyle comes into play. Restyle is an open source library. It provides a type enforced system for building UI components powered by TypeScript. Its themability is baked right in from the get-go. So if and when you decide to implement dark mode or a theme, it's extremely trivial and easy to do so. I'm going to walk you through some of the best practices or concepts that come about through Restyle and how they solved the problems that we had while working on Arrive. Restyle expects you to have a defined theme. This is a global theme object with a set of values for colors, spacing, breakpoints, and a number of other things. This theme is then used by passing into the theme provider using the theme prop. How do colors work now? The first thing that we did was realize that, hey, every design system will commonly have a color palette. These palettes will include a number of base colors with lighter and darker shades. So the first thing we did was implement this palette without worrying about the theme. The next thing we did was then use this palette to define the colors within our theme. And the names that we gave each of our colors was very context driven. So for example, we had card primary background and button primary background. This scenario made it very easy for us to add new colors to the palette, modify colors in our palette, and change the implementation of that palette for a very specific context without worrying about any ripple effects that it might have across the app. This made it very easy to introduce new colors as well, and just keep an overall well-managed state with regards to colors. Spacing became a lot easier when we implemented a number multiplication system. We chose one specific number, and all of our spacing essentially just followed a multiples of that spacing number. With regards to naming, we used a t-shirt style naming convention. So we had small, medium, large, XL. This is pretty nice because you can easily extend this to add smaller and larger sizing or spacing numbers using the X notation. So you could implement double XL or XS for a smaller spacing measurement. Restyle also provides two predefined components called box and text. We realized that the default view and text components just weren't the best starting points, so we needed to override these with the text and box components. These utilize the theme right off the bat. So you can pass in style properties using props to the text and box components. Color properties and measurement properties all map to values that you've provided in your theme. You can also pass in a text variant to apply a predefined text style that you'll have defined in your theme. The box provides a similar experience to the text component, but adds a number of additional props for padding, margin, alignments, and borders. So how do we tackle dark mode now? It's super, super simple. The first thing we need to do is build a new theme based off of the default theme. The only thing we're doing here is overriding the colors that we need to change for our dark mode theme. The next thing we need to do is find a way to be able to store that value someplace and toggle the value back and forth. So in this case, I'm using a useState hook to set the dark mode value. Based on that value, we pass in dark theme or theme to the theme provider. And that's literally it. Your restyle components now automatically adjust to accommodate the current theme. The dev experience for this entire process is also super awesome. Since this is all backed by TypeScript, as you're developing your app, as you're styling things automatically autocomplete, and you get all the other benefits that TypeScript provides. There's a number of other features that we didn't get a chance to talk about today, so I highly recommend checking out the project on GitHub. Thanks so much for having me today and for listening. Check out Restyle on GitHub and Shopify's career page if you're looking for a new gig. Thanks so much. Cheers.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Kiki St. Ange. I've been with Microsoft for about 5 years now on the Windows UI platform team, and have recently been helping drive the React Native for Windows and Mac efforts with that team.
I am Eloy Duran, or Eloy. I have been using React Native professionally since early 2016 and have joined the Microsoft Office team in December to help them out with their React Native efforts.
Today, we'll be giving you a very brief talk about React Native for Windows and Mac and that effort. Today, we'll be talking about how to sort of our focus around that, why we chose to add it, how to set up in Windows and Mac, and then Eloy will be taking us through a more in-depth look at installing a community module, running on both Windows and Mac, and just sort of the dev experience there. Then I'll go over future modules and sort of how we want to support the community modules in the future with React Native, and then we will cover some resources and wrap up. So, as many of you may know, React Native originally started out as a way to bring JavaScript-based apps cross-platform to both Android and iOS. Of course, we're always looking for ways to bring more developers to Windows, and we saw this as an opportunity, this framework as a great opportunity to entice web devs to experiment with the native Windows app development while still being able to utilize their skills and tools that they're used to. In adding support for Windows, there was a lot of gaps that we needed to fill in order to make it work great on our platform. So we added things like pen, mouse, and keyboard. That kind of support was added, as well as support for other Windows devices like Xbox and dual screen. But as we were doing this work, we realized that there was actually a lot of crossover between what we were writing for Windows and that desktop experience and what macOS has. In fact, a lot of APIs and inputs and even just general tools and functionality that we had written and enabled to work great for React Native for Windows matched very closely in behavior to what was needed to light up that same experience on Mac. So they took this realization as an opportunity to not only give back to the React Native community by driving the React Native for Mac effort, but also as a secondary opportunity to be a leader in the React Native space when it comes to cross-platform development for desktop experiences specifically. And that's what we're going to be focusing on today. Now I'm going to pass this off to Eloy, who's going to show us how to do this in code.
Thanks, Kiki. For the sake of time, because we have very little time, I'm going to be going through this as quickly as possible. So to create a macOS or Windows React Native application, we start with the normal template. You may also want to have an iOS and Android application, etc. So those are all in the default template. So this should not be new to anybody creating React Native applications already. So now we wait for the template to be downloaded. Great, and so now we can move on to adding the macOS bits. We do that using the npx React Native macOS init command. And before we continue, I'm going to already add another dependency, which is a dependency that has a native module that supports both macOS and Windows. Okay, let's go ahead and open this up in VS Code. Okay, so as you can see, we've now added our macOS fork and also this native module. Let's go ahead and get that building. First, we'll need to install all the native bits, which is both React Native and the web view. Then let's also start a packager we can actually start the build as you are used to using npx React Native and then run macOS. And there we go. And as you saw, it was loading. You can see that here as well. And here we have the well-known launch screen of the React Native app. Then let's see, open up the app.js, and here we can, for instance, change some code. And as you know by now, React Native instant reloading, pretty sweet. But we also added the community web view module, so let's try using that instead. For that, I'm just going to paste in some code that I've prepared, which imports the web view from the module and then just renders that web view. Let's see, and it will just show the React Native Windows side. Cool. So we can do the exact same thing on Windows. And here we'll be doing pretty much the same thing as before, except Windows is ahead a little bit, so we can actually use a newer version. So let's go ahead and create that, again, that same project. And again, like before, we're going to add the Windows bits, so similar to before, except now it's React Native Windows init. And again, like before, we're going to add the WebView native module. So let's, oh, I am not entirely used to Windows, so forgive me. Let's see, we need to open the solution in Visual Studio. Once in here, we're going to navigate to the solution and add an existing project which comes with the WebView package. Let's see, here we go. So we add that, and then to the actual application we add a reference to that project we just added, to the product of that project. Okay, and finally we're going to make a few code changes. Let's see, we're gonna add an include here, save that, and to the app file we are going to add some initialization code. Let's see, we should do that just before initialize component. Oh, here I go, command saving again. Cool. Let's see, then I'm just going to save all, close this project, and then we can, as normal, run the React Native, and then in this case run the Windows command, which will build all of the React Native Windows sources as well as the WebView package. Okay, and there we go, loading the bundle. And then let's see, open this one here, and again I'm going to just paste in the same code that we had before. Let's see, Control S to save, which will retrigger, and there we go. Cool. Back to you, Kiki.
Awesome. Thanks, Eloy. So a few things that I want to sort of talk about as you saw Eloy set up the WebView demo is that you may be wondering, what about all the other awesome community modules that React Native has today and available for you? And I just wanted to let everybody know that we are tracking and working to enable a lot of the core and essential, as well as we get further in the project, more and more community modules working for Windows and in turn working for Mac as well. So Windows comes first and Mac will follow closely after. Lastly, there's some resources that I wanted to have everybody know about so that they can follow us more closely. Obviously, the React Native site, that's the origin. We also are our own React Native for Windows repo, as well as our doc site, and we do have a dual screen repo. We didn't talk about dual screen today, but we have some information up there if you're curious about it, and our Twitter handle, as well as some tools and stuff that we recommend if you're developing in React Native for Windows. Other than that, that's it for our talk, and I thank everybody for coming, and I look forward to seeing what you create. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Trevor Brindle, and I work for Modus Create. This presentation is called End Your Development Environment Nightmares with Envinfo and Solidarity. So your development environment. Your development environment is everything, the sum of all the tools and processes you use while developing software. Files, variables, binaries, apps, everything down to the shell you use when you're developing your application. A great example is React Native. The stack itself plus all the build tools, the debug tools, everything you use, editors, terminals, browsers, everything all counts. And it's growing in complexity. And wherever there's complexity, there's bugs. So the problems. Works on my computer. The evergreen command not found. What version do you have? What version do I need? And every issue template ever. Please mention other relevant information such as operating system, Node.js, Yarn, and NPM versions. That's a lot of commands to type in. So how do I find this? If I need to find what Android SDK version I have, I don't remember, and I wrote a library that gets it. So this is the part of the infomercial where we smash cabbages into a blender, and we have to say there's got to be a better way. There is. Know what you have, and enforce what you use, using nvinfo and Solidarity. So nvinfo, what exactly is it? Let's back up a second with a story time. Imagine 5 new developers getting started from different backgrounds on a React Native app. We all had different machine setups, and React Native's a little finicky sometimes. This originally started with a shell script, combining OS, Xcode, Node, NPM, Yarn, everything. But I realized that command -v until you table flip isn't an awful lot of fun, and that's a lot of commands to type in. Then I realized, we're probably not the only ones having this problem, so I wrote a PR to React Native to kind of just give them my shell script that I used under React Native info. And it was suggested, this probably shouldn't be our library. Why don't you write it? And so I did. The whole story is on Medium and on my blog, nvinfo and OSS story. And I highly recommend you take a look. So this is nvinfo. It might be a little anticlimactic, but it's incredibly useful because no one's really conglomerated this information together all at once. There's actually 17 different calls made to various system binaries just to show what's on this screen. And this is about 20% of what nvinfo can do. So the easiest way to run nvinfo is through npx. Chances are it's probably already on your machine. You can also install it globally or download and run a binary. We bundle the node binary in there with it, just for convenience sake. Also, there's a sister project that is a bash-related script for getenv.info, and then you pipe it directly to your bash. You can also add it directly as a dependency in one of your projects. So if you want to do that, you can import any one of the helpers that nvinfo uses under the hood and await them and then log them out. Or you can run nvinfo directly using run in a configuration object. Something that looks a little bit like this. So you pick and choose anything that you want, CPU, memory, bash, Go, Chrome, NPM packages, and then print it out. So turns out all of these projects saw a definite need for this type of thing, especially in issue templates, helping maintainers get better information to help people better. So what if you needed more control on a per project basis rather than just running a script? You want to use Solidarity. So Solidarity is cross-platform, it's a light touch, it's time-saving, it's very easy to get started with. You can check files, variables, anything you can dump into a CLI or shell, and can also handle custom plugins. So getting started with Solidarity is easy. You install it, you create a .solidarity file, and then you run it. So this is the configuration. You create a object of requirements, you name it Yarn or NPM or whatever, give it a semver to look for, and a possible error message. The neat thing here is we can actually add it as templates, the installed version and the wanted version, so you can actually give your developers awesome error messages that they can copy and paste in scripts that'll fix it for them. So this is it in action. You can check Node, NPM binary, they both checked out. Your Yarn binary is actually ahead of what you're supposed to be on for this project, and we know that Yarn is not necessarily deterministic if it's not on the same version. So Solidarity checks failed. We can copy and paste in that curl script, and then it'll check out. So what if we actually wanted that 1.6 version? We wanted to update. Well, simple as run solidarity snapshot, and then it'll set yarn to that version. Run it again, and everything checks out. Some neat tricks you can do. I call it paint it red mode. It's called unterminated escape code. So if you know anything about terminal, go look up terminal escape codes, and you can use that in your script. You don't terminate it, so on your npm pre-build hook, if it fails, you just paint the background red, but you still let the developer continue to build. So it's a nice way to give them that warning without actually, ruining their flow. So you can put this on pre-commit hooks, pre-build hooks, and it's especially nice on pre-commit for git config. So if you want to make sure everyone's actually committing with the right email, this is a good way to do it. So here it is. You can have something not checking out, but still letting your developer continue building. And that's it. If you like this content and want to see more, you can always look at moduscreate.com, follow us on Twitter, you can follow me on Twitter, and reach out to me directly if you want to see anything new in NVINFO or Solidarity. Thanks.
Awesome, everybody. Well, we just saw a bunch of really great talks and one mediocre one. So let's find out which one's which. Can I ask all the speakers to join me in the Q&A? And let's wake everybody up. They love it when I do that, by the way. Awesome. Well, so if you have a paid account, you can ask some questions. We're going to get into some Q&A. We have a bunch of Lightning Talk speakers right now and only about 10 minutes. But I think that if you pay, you can go to the additional rooms to chat with people directly. So how did everybody feel about their talk? Is it just as you recorded it? Some nods? Yeah, things are looking good? Yeah, awesome.
Color might have been a little off.
Yeah, I think so, just a little bit. I'll actually, Trevor, NVINFO, you've been working on that for a long time, and you have stickers. Do you have any stickers with you right now? See, well done. Be sure to message Trevor on Twitter so that way and tell him he has to mail you some stickers specifically.
I can do that.
By the way, it is everywhere, right? Like people are picking it up more and more.
Yeah, it's kind of neat every time I go into the NPM page and go look at different places that it's showing up. You see it on GitHub issues a lot and like, hey, I recognize that format. But recently I found Parcel picked it up, ViewPress, and let's see, Verdaccio, an NPM registry. Obviously, it's always been in React Native, but a lot of different frameworks and packages are picking it up, not only for their issues, but in their internal CLIs.
That's cool, but I just want to warn you, Steve Jobs told me it was very uncool to name drop like you're doing right now, so try not to do that too much specifically. Alloy and Kiki, y'all had a great setup here. Now, Alloy is specifically geared towards making sure that UI fits the platform, which I'm pretty sure all designers are either cringing or applauding when they hear that. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, totally. So I think one of the misconceptions with React Native is definitely that people take it as to mean write once, deploy everywhere. Whereas on the websites, from day one till now, it has said learn once, write everywhere, right? And I think that nuance is very important. And as coming from a native background, I very much want to respect the user's decision for a specific platform, and that with that comes, user experience, UI principles. And I'm most familiar with the Apple one, which is the Apple Human Interface Guidelines. If you Google that, it's a very nice reading material. I'm sure you don't have anything else to do right now at home anyways. Windows, Kiki, correct me if I'm wrong, look for the Fluent UI design documents. Try to leverage those. That's the nice thing about a solution like React Native, right? Where you are able to share a bunch of code and all in the same language, but the views are actually native views. So try to make use of those where possible. And I think that's a good choice for React Native.
Awesome. Well said. And by the way, Kiki is on back order for a webcam, I believe, that would be showing up sometime in 2025. So
I know, that sucks.
We need like a donate the webcam program or something. People have got to have something, some like, oh yeah, well I need 12 megapixels now, so this this 10 megapixel camera is just going in the garbage. We need that for other people. So
A few
Yeah,
extra
I gotta get that
potatoes.
figured out before build.
Yeah. What was that, Trevor?
I have a few extra potatoes.
Yeah, potatoes. That's
Yeah.
oddly enough, I don't know if you know this.
Potato quality cameras? Come on.
Potato
Great.
yeah, it's delicious and nutritious. Sangeetha, by the way, speaking about MLKit, and as many of you know, I love machine learning and I love connecting it to JavaScript. You said that there's some additional APIs. Could you elaborate on a few of those for us?
Yeah, sure. So the APIs that the MLKit React Native library offers can be broadly classified as vision-based or natural language-based. In the talk, I spoke about the text detection ones and face detection ones. A few other APIs that they offer are features such as smart replies or language detection. And when it comes to vision, stuff like barcode scanning, image labeling, and all that. But one gotcha is that certain APIs such as language translation are available with native support, not available in React Native right now, but hopefully you get those support as well. So.
That's awesome. And we talk about facial detection again, just another gouge at Kiki over there who can't use any of those libraries. Sorry, it's just easy. Well, that's awesome, and I'm sure people will have plenty more questions for you in the Q&A directly with the speakers afterward. And then don't forget, if you have a paid account, you could be asking questions right now in the Q&A alt track with the Cool Kids track. And this is a great place, and those questions I can ask in front of everybody. And then I guess that leaves us with Haris, which of course I told you I'd mispronounce your name. You mentioned in your talk that there were some other features. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Sure. I think two other features that Resell provides that I personally really enjoy. One is that you can create your own custom components that that you'll need to use over and over again. So for example, if you've got a card component with specific styles and border radiuses and shadows and stuff, you don't have to keep using the box component and then applying those styles over and over. You can just create a card component that uses Restyle that's built on top of Box, which is super powerful. And the other thing are breakpoints. So Restyle provides responsive support out the box too. So you can conditionally apply styles based on different breakpoints that you can define in your theme.
Fantastic. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, everybody. Is this the first time some of y'all have met one another in here? I get to see, look, it's a virtual world. I love this, and the fact that not everybody can fly to Amsterdam all the time. As you can tell, Eloy is sitting on his boat right now, just having a blast. That is not at all a green screen. That is real. You probably did take that video for real, though, I bet.
It's 1 hour ago. It's fresh footage.
Oh, my
this is
goodness.
outside of my window. It really is.
Everybody remembers outside, right? It was fun. So,
I quite like it this way, too.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. Thank you so much, everyone here. I know that people will have additional questions in the Q&A rooms. I just want to say thank you for joining us all, sharing your information, and everybody watching at home, follow these people on Twitter. Follow them on the Twitter, YouTube, FaceSpace, Twitch sphere. That's what they call it this day. So definitely follow all these wonderful people. They've got great more information for them. And stick around and then reach out to them if you have any further questions. Thank you, everybody, for being a part of this. Oh, shit. All right. So it looks like we're back on track. Did you miss me? I'm sure you did. So we're going to kick back into action right here. And we're going to start with our next talk. So our next talk is Tanmay Gopal. I hope that I'm saying that correctly. And the talk is going to be about GraphQL integration and a bunch of cool stuff. But don't take my word from it. How I went from being skeptical about Relay to falling in love with it. Please bang your virtual hands together for Tenmai.
Everyone. Super happy to be here. Hope you all are doing fine. I'm going to talk a little bit about falling in love with Relay. So this is my journey of kind of being skeptical about Relay as a GraphQL client and then gradually falling in love with it. My name is Tanmay Gopal, and before I get started, I'll give you a quick introduction. So I'm the founder and CEO at Hasura. Hasura is an open source technology startup. We build a GraphQL engine that can connect to primarily your database and other services as well, so that you can kind of stitch across them and get a unified GraphQL API. It runs as a Docker container in your own infrastructure. It's open source under the Apache license, and you can check it out on GitHub. A lot of this work and this talk has been kind of motivated by the fact that we've been adding Relay support in Hasura, and towards the end, I'll show you how you can kind of get started playing around with Relay and Hasura. All right. So let's dive into Relay. When you think about GraphQL and you think about integrating GraphQL into your applications, right? The biggest selling point of GraphQL is that, at least for me, was that it was for the first time an API that I found easy to explore and integrate, right? So it was like I can kind of look at the way the API is, I can auto-complete it, I can look at the, I can understand how I need to integrate the API because I can look at the types, right? I can integrate that with my type system, whatever I'm using on the client side, and stuff like that. Where Relay fits in is that Relay handles the responsibility, or Relay makes it easy for us to achieve the theoretical best data fetch, right? That we can possibly achieve while using GraphQL and staying sane. So I'm going to talk about the staying sane aspect, right? So how can, while using GraphQL in our app, right, what is the best possible data fetching that we can do while introducing the least amount of burden on ourselves as developers, right? So that's kind of where Relay fits in. And this is going to become more clear as we go along. And this is why Relay is amazing. And the ideas behind Relay are really amazing. So to kind of motivate or kind of look at one example through this talk, what I'm going to do is take the example of a data dashboard, right? So this is a front-end application. It's a React app. It's a data admin dashboard, right? So you can see that there's tables on the left. I'm looking at a particular table. That table has columns. That table has a filtering option, right? There's stuff like that. This app is actually the Hasura console, which is a React app. But in any case, imagine that this is a fairly medium complex React application, just because there's a lot of data fetch happening. So if you look at the red boxes that I've kind of highlighted here, let me just bring in my pointer. If you look at these red boxes that I've highlighted here, right, those are kind of the different pieces of data that we're fetching from our API. So here we're fetching a list of all of the tables, right? Here we're fetching information about that particular table. We're only displaying the table name here. Here we're fetching a list of all of the columns so that we can render this drop down, and the column type so that we can render the operations so that you can filter on that column, right? And here I'm fetching a list of all of the columns so that I can render a table view, right? So those are kind of the different pieces of data that I need to fetch for this application. Let's look at another view in the same application. So now I'm on a different view. I'm on the modified table view, right? So here what I'm looking at is I'm looking at the different columns and the types of those columns in my database, right? So I'm listing out all of the different columns. I'm listing out what the types of those columns are, right? Whether it's a text column or a character column, or is it nullable? And then one case, one of the columns that I have clicked on as a user, I have an expanded view. So in this expanded view, I'm not looking at just 2 properties of this column. I'm looking at like 5 different properties of this column, right? So I'm fetching a list of attributes, but for one of those attributes, I'm fetching a larger amount of data, right? Again, a fairly typical scenario that you can kind of imagine in an application, right? All right, so let's kind of see how we would have used a GraphQL API to fetch this data and build this app, right? The first cut, the simplest thing to do is I would have just taken every single UI component and attached a query to it, right? That's it. So I make a query here to fetch the tables. I make a query here to fetch the table name for a particular ID, right? Maybe I'm getting this ID from the URL or from a particular component that was clicked on, right? Or from this component that was clicked on. Then I make another component for this filter column kind of UI that I have, where I fetch the column's name and the type. And here for this kind of table browser, I'm making a query to fetch the columns names, right? So I'm making different queries. It's really easy because all of the data that I need to fetch is at the component level, right? So the benefit is of having one query per component is that it's super easy, right? It's modular, quote unquote. This is actually, of course, in practice, a terrible idea because you're making a tremendous number of network calls. Kind of defeats the whole purpose and things that people say about GraphQL. In fact, it's not just making many network calls. If you look at this UI carefully, you'll see that I'm making a lot of redundant calls, right? I'm fetching the name here, which I've kind of already fetched here. I'm fetching the column names and types here, which I've already fetched here. So I'm making redundant queries as well, right? Apart from the fact that I'm making multiple queries, which is terrible, right? So the first optimization that I can do, right? The simplest optimization that I can do is make one gigantic query. So I make one gigantic query for this page, right? And this is theoretically the best query I can make, right? So I make a query, I fetch all of the tables in their name. For a particular table that I want to render, I fetch the table name and I fetch the kind of columns, the names of the columns that I'm going to show here in the table browser and the types that I'm going to use for showing the different operators, right? So if it's an integer, I can do equals. If it's a Boolean, I'll show is true, is false, right? Whatever. So this is kind of an optimal query that I can make. This is nice, right? This is good, but I don't like this idea because even though it's optimal, as a developer that's building like that, as a developer who's kind of building these different components, it's inconvenient because the data requirements for a child component, right? Like for example, our filter column UI or our data browser UI, the requirements of that data are kind of somewhere in the ancestor, right? So it's somewhere in the ancestor component that is kind of making this query, right? And then I'm going to pass on all of the props to all of the child components gradually. Not a terribly kind of fun experience, right? So the next thing I can do is introduce fragments, right? So what I can do is instead of having a gigantic query at the top level, I'll have a query at the top level that refers to different fragments that I have, right? So whenever I build a child component, so let's say I'm building the table header component, I'll declare a fragment that says, here's a fragment, I want the name, right? If I'm building the filter UI, I'll say, well, here's a fragment, I want all of the columns, the names of the columns, and the types, right? So I can render this UI. If I'm building this table browser component, I'll basically just fetch the names of the columns. That's all I need to kind of create this table header, right? So I declare these fragments kind of alongside the components that I build, right? So let's say I have 3 files here. In each of these files, I include a fragment, right? And then in the ancestral component, I'll kind of go to the ancestor query component somewhere, right? Even though these components have a hierarchy, I have to include, this fragment in the ancestor component here or something like that, right? So that's kind of what the fragment experience would look like. So the pros here are that it's nice because every component that I'm building, I can declare the data. I can declare exactly the data that I want. The cons though is that the experience of actually using fragments is not particularly great, and it is frequently error prone. I'm going to talk about 2 particular pain points in just basic vanilla integration of fragments, right? The first is importing fragments, and the second is that all child components will get access to all of the data. So let's just take a look at what this means, right? So the first, and this is an example that I've taken from the Apollo client fragments documentation page. If you look at the left here, I'm making, I have a child component. So imagine this is comments, and comments have votes, right? And so what I'm looking at is, I'm looking at the child component where I'm voting on a particular on a particular comment. So this has a fragment, right? And then the parent, right, has the entire query, or maybe a parent fragment, right? It has a larger fragment that includes this fragment, right? So this part is necessary, right? I need to include my child fragment in the parent fragment, right? But this is the part that is a little bit irritating, right? I need to include and import this fragment as a variable inside this fragment. This is irritating, right? This is not fun because now I have to kind of make sure that not only do I include the fragment inside my components, but then I also, whenever I'm writing the parent component, I'm kind of importing that fragment as well and including that fragment here as well, right? Which I may forget to do, or all kinds of things can happen. There could be errors, right? So those are kind of the it's not an ideal experience, right? There's another pain point. The other pain point is that if I have fragments, right, that I include in the top level query, what will happen is that all of these components, right, the React components where, let's say I fetch these components and I assign a variable to them to fetch the table data, right? When I fetch this data and I assign it a variable, this component will actually end up having access not just to the name attribute that it needs, but also to the columns attribute and also to columns.name and columns.type, right? And if I look at the columns filter component that needs only name and type, this is fine. I'm going to have access to columns.name and columns.type. But the column browser thing, which only needs access to column name, will also end up getting access to column type, right? And I have to be careful with the way I pass these props to my child components from the parent query that I have, right? And it requires a little bit of care. And if I don't take care, what can often happen, especially as we're building applications quickly, let's say I'm building this browser component and I realize I need access to column type, maybe I forget to update the fragment, right? Because I can do table.columns.type anyway, because I have access to that, right? Because of some other fragment that I was using. I'll be lazy, right? Or I might be lazy and I might forget to kind of include that attribute in this fragment here, right? Just because somebody else was requesting for it. And this is going to be the starting point of errors as soon as we have a large number of fragments. So if you want to make fragments easier, what we really want to do is make sure that fragments get automatically imported and validated as we use them in our components. And we also want the kind of optimizations to happen when we're passing down data, right? So that we're getting some kind of isolation and modularity in the components that we're writing, right? So that when I feel like I'm writing a component for a fragment, I feel like I only have access to the data that I declared in my fragment, right? And apart from that, I don't have access to any more data, right? Unless it's explicitly passed down to me from the parent component, right? And so if you look at Relay has two design decisions that make this quite easy. The first is that Relay is not just a GraphQL client that is a library that you can kind of include, create GraphQL queries and make GraphQL queries with, but Relay also has a compiler that makes it possible the compiler basically kind of runs like as a build step, right? So it's running in parallel as you're doing your development workflow. And as you're kind of building fragments and importing fragments in queries, all of the fragments getting imported, all of the fragments getting validated is all kind of happening at build time, so that I don't get these runtime errors with fragment imports, right? Or for example, when I think about data masking, when I use the fragment in my component, I can only use the data that I have access to, which is the way that I use the fragment container inside Relay, right? So to kind of tangibly look at the work that gets removed for me, I do not have to explicitly import fragments in my parent fragment or in my parent query. And when I try to access the data that my particular component will get, right, I will only have access to those attributes that I've declared in my fragment, right? So here I get access only to table.name. Here I'll only get access to columns.name and columns.type. And here I'll only get access to columns.name again, right? So this is nice because if I try to access some other property, I'll get a build time and a compile time error, right? Which is neat, right? So which is when you use kind of fragments with Relay, this will kind of start working for you automatically, right? I didn't want to get into too much syntax to show you what the setup is like, but just wanted to kind of stress on the concepts that you'll be able to use. All right. The next problem that you'll run into as you start using fragments, right? Fragments are nice. I'm using fragments everywhere. It's great. My components are modular, right? But the next problem that I'll run into is going to be that I will soon need variables in my fragments, right? So what I'm going to need is, let's talk about a simple example. Let's say that in this kind of dashboard that I have, I want the users to choose, I want the users to be able to see only the first 3 columns. Maybe I have like 1,000 column table, right? And I only want to see the first 3 columns, right? So maybe I want to do a limit, which is, I want to introduce some kind of a limit, or in Relay terminology, you would say, you'd call it like you'd want just the first 3, right? You want only the first 3 columns, right? And if that's what you want, you'll notice that you need to have a variable that this particular fragment has, right? So maybe this particular component has something like a UI that says, how many columns do you want to see? I want to see 3, I want to see 10. So I choose the number of columns that I want to see, and then that becomes a user-given kind of variable, right, to the fragment. The thing is, this is obviously possible to do. This is valid syntax. But if I want to use a variable in a fragment, I need to declare it at the top level, right? That means that if I need to use a variable in a fragment somewhere deep in my kind of child, in my component hierarchy, I need to declare that variable at the top level query, right? Because I need to declare query variables, which is, as you can imagine, a little bit irritating, right? I mean, these variables kind of belong somewhere deep down in the component hierarchy. These variables come through user input. These variables kind of don't belong in an ancestor component, right? Imagine if we were back to our original query-based design, right? If we had one query per component, I'll be making a stupidly large number of fetches, but I would be able to declare exactly the variables that I need, when I need them, right? Which is cool. And so if the way this works in Relay is, what I would like to do is kind of be able to declare variables for my fragments locally, right? I would like to declare them at the fragment level, and I would kind of like to use them at a fragment level as well. And this is where a Relay design concept of having arguments and argument definitions. These are two client-side directives, and two client-side directives that you can add to any fragment to kind of locally define and declare a variable then and there, right? At the fragment level without having to go to the top level query and modify that. And that is really neat. And we look at an example soon, right? And we look at an example of what the syntax looks like soon. But for now, in the next kind of the next UI example that we look at. But for now, bear in mind that we need some way of being able to handle variables locally, right? As soon as you realize that you want to handle variables locally, you'll realize that actually what you wanted to do was, whenever the user is kind of providing input somewhere deep down in the component hierarchy, right? What you want to do is you want to update that fragment, right? So if you look at that kind of example where I wanted to view just 3 columns, maybe the user will kind of provide us more input, and I want to view just 10 columns, right? And as the user is kind of providing input to us, we want to update just that fragment, and we don't want to rerun. We definitely do not want to run the entire query again, right? That's kind of what we want to do, right? So we want to use the modularity of fragments, but we want kind of the independent lifecycle ability almost of a query, right? And let's take a look at a slightly more tangible example, right? So in applications that you're building, you would frequently see this when this comes for pagination, right? When you want to kind of paginate through, you have a child component that is rendering a list, right? And then as you paginate through it, the variables that you're using to fetch that list, those variables are changing, right? And those variables are changing on demand. Now, when those variables are changing, you want to refetch the list. You don't want to run the entire query again, right? Or in the use case that I was talking about, which is kind of like an expand use case, right? Or a read more kind of use case. And just like I said, this is like wanting the desire for having queries almost for each component, right? So let's look at a tangible example and what the queries look like. So here I'm now looking at an example, similar example of where I have a list, right? And one item of the list, whenever the user clicks on expand, right, I want to view more information about this attribute. So by default, I only want 2 attributes per list element. And if I expand it, I want 5 attributes for that list element, right? And this is for the dashboard that we're building, right? So if I think about this, what I want to do is, I want to run a query to fetch all of the elements. In this case, the elements are columns. So I want to fetch all of the columns, right? And I want to fetch minimal information per column. So let's look at what the minimal information here is. I only want to fetch name and description. So these are the 2 attributes that I want to show. In case one of the elements is expanded, I want to be able to show expanded information, right, for that particular column, right? And so now let's look at the expanded query. I want to see name. I want to see like 10 other attributes, right? And this is a variable that's kind of defined at this fragment level, right? So I'm using argument definitions to define a variable at this fragment level to say, while rendering this list, right, if this variable happens to be true for this particular column, I want to also include this particular fragment, right? Now on the first load, our default value is going to be false. So on the first load, we're going to fetch all of the elements with just name and description. When the user clicks on expand, that's when I want to kind of rerun this fragment, right? But fetch more data for this fragment, right? That's kind of what I want to do, right? I want to refetch the data for this particular fragment only if the expanded is true to fetch more data, right? And with relay, that is as simple as going to a particular fragment and saying, let's make this fragment refetchable. And whenever there's a click or a user event, we'll run a function called refetch, which is a function that you have on a fragment, with the variable set to true. So this fragment is going to run as a query, right? It's going to run as a query with this variable set to true so that you can fetch exactly this data, right? And that is going to happen just for that one column, right? One instance where I clicked on expand, right? And this is really interesting, right? This is, if you think about the way it works underneath, if you think about the ergonomics, it's like, oh, this fragment is like a query, so I can run this query again. That's a convenient thought process, right? But in reality, it's not easy to kind of make that work because a fragment can't run in isolation, right? A fragment needs to run as a part of a larger query. So how can a fragment run by itself? And the secret here is that a relay API would typically implement a node interface and a root resolver for any node. So a relay compatible API, well, it's not compulsory anymore. It's kind of optional. Is that every element that you're fetching has an interface or implements an interface called a node, and it has a globally unique ID, right? And your relay GraphQL API has a root resolver to fetch any node just by its kind of GUID, its globally kind of unique ID. So what relay can do is that when I request the client to refetch a particular fragment, the client doesn't have to run the entire query again. The client just reruns the query for that particular column or that particular element, right, that I wanted to rerun. And the client is able to do that because every element is an instance of node and every element has a unique ID, right? So the query that's kind of running in the background is actually query, element, unique ID, and the exact fields that I want, right? So in our particular example, there's a background query that runs whenever we do a refetch. The query that's running, the underlying GraphQL query that's running is a query on column where ID equal to the current ID for this column that I'm rendering, right? Which is a GUID that I have. And it's fetching the fields name, description, type, nullable, unique, default, whatever, right? Like it's fetching whatever different attributes that I want. And this is really nice, right? I get the convenience of using fragments, right? But at the same time, I get the ability to kind of use, I get the ability to kind of treat each fragment like a query. And this is really convenient, right? So to kind of summarize, if you start looking at Relay, it can be a little bit overwhelming, right? If you look at the Relay docs, you look at people talking about Relay, there's a lot going on. Don't worry too much about that. Think about the modularity that you want in your application and the modularity that you can achieve with a good fragment-based approach. As you start thinking about that modularity and you start thinking about using fragments in practice, you'll notice that you'll have to rebuild a lot of the same design decisions that Relay enforces on you upfront, right? For example, unique names of fragments that allow us to import fragments automatically, right? Having client-side directives that allow us to declare variables for fragments, having the node interface and a global unique ID that allow us to refetch and rerun fragments on demand. That makes pagination easy. It makes things like, expand an element easy, right? It makes all of those kinds of interactions easier. So today I'm launching, and today we've been working very hard on this over the last few weeks, is you can try Relay out with Hasura. So head to hasura.io/graphql/relay. All you need to do is kind of deploy to Heroku if you want to just try things out, set up your database, do a little bit of data modeling, set up some relationships, right? between these data models that you have, set up the permission rules, and you'll get an Relay API instantly that you can start using and integrating. And then, of course, beyond the CRUD kind of APIs that you get, once you want to start adding custom business logic, you can add that in your favorite language as well, Node.js or TypeScript or Python or Ruby or whatever you want, and deploy them in serverless functions or wherever, and that will kind of get added to your GraphQL API with Hasura as well, and you'll be able to try Relay out. So do try that out, give us some feedback. It's in beta, and it should go into, we should be able to release it in stable very, very soon. For this particular talk, I needed a lot of convincing and understanding and hand-holding, and the Relay docs obviously helped, but two people who especially helped were Gabriel and Sean. You should definitely follow them on Twitter at ZTH and sgrove. And they also have two really nice blog posts that they've written together on Relay, which talks about the GraphQL client that does the dirty work for you and talks about pagination. So you should check that out as well. That's it from me. I am Tanmay. You can find me on Twitter. Please feel free to reach out if you have any questions on GraphQL, Hasura, Relay, and I'll do my best at answering them or connecting you to people who can answer them. Thank you. That's it from me.
All right, everybody. Well, thank you so much for that information. And before we jump in next, I just need to take a moment and thank our platinum sponsor, NX. So NX is the preeminent toolkit for monorepo development, which enables you to build React applications smarter and faster. NX is created by a software development firm, Narwhal. It's a fully open source and free to use toolkit for JavaScript developers. And remember, Narwhal is no vowels in there. So it's NRWL. So a little bit of a thanks so much to NX. Okay. And I think now it's a great chance if we could have our speaker join me on the stage. Hi, Tanmay. How are you doing?
Hey. Me and Ray, we're both doing fine.
I love it. All right, wait, let's now we're both cool. Let's rock this. Fun story. Last time I did that, I accidentally left it on for an entire talk one time. It was interesting. So let's start at a high level here. We actually have one question. And so the questions are rolling in. Don't forget you can ask questions in the alt track Q&A. And don't forget you could speak with our speaker after this broadcasted Q&A session. But we have a person who's asking, why did you hate Relay before? And I think this is a great opportunity because the tooling has been growing. We are solving better and better problems. But historically, we didn't have any of these things, right? Like we were trying to figure this all out together. And now we're sort of exposed to a new tool every day with JavaScript fatigue. So I'd love to hear perhaps a quick little history of how you kind of got from there to here, including our question, why did you hate Relay before?
Yeah, I think that was just me being a little bit dramatic. You hate what you don't know. That's the theme of the world right now that we're living in. So
yeah,
that used to be me. But it was more of like I did not understand Relay, right? And I think like really that kind of stemmed from I think my simultaneous frustration with and kind of joy about two things in balance, right? Like I like things when they become simpler, right? Like I like it when like over time, like over decades, like things have become simpler for us to do, right? But then occasionally to make things simpler, we have to make things more complex, and that becomes a little bit frustrating sometimes, right? So for example, Relay makes something that's very complex, like data fetching for UI components, which is a very complex topic to kind of almost automate away for developers. It's a hard thing to do, but to get to that world where things are automated for you and nice, you have to kind of jump that. You have to buy into a certain amount of complexity and like just learn something new and then feel like, why am I learning this? It's going to change anyway in 3 years. So I mean, it's not justified, but it's a thing, right? It's a thing, and I think I don't know if it'll ever end, but hopefully one day things will just be simple. I can just think about it happen.
Oh, you don't know about simple.js? It just takes everything and makes it simple. You will not find that library. That's not real. But yeah, it's an adventure. It's a setup. And thank you so much for sharing. I think the key part here is that you share this wonderful information with us on these conferences, and you help people out, that kind of stuff. To that accord, we have another question from our audience. Manu asks one question concerning the fragments. It seems that Apollo client flattens, with quotation marks, the data so that Apollo doesn't fetch twice the same data, even with different queries. In this case, do we need fragments in Apollo? Does Relay flatten data too? Please help.
Yeah, I think it depends on, I'm not sure what you mean by flatten, but let's say, for example, you kind of like realize that you've fetched 3 attributes for this particular entity already. And so in the next query that is fetching 4 attributes, you don't need to fetch the first 3. That while that is an optimization, you're still making multiple queries, right? You're still making multiple queries. Whereas with fragments, what you would be doing is on the first load, you would be composing all of them together to make just one query. So you're still better on the network. And then with Relay, you can still kind of buy into this way of thinking where each fragment is also just a query. So later on, right, some because of user interaction, you need one component to update just by itself. And in that case, it kind of behaves like a query because you can make it refetchable. So you're kind of getting the best of both worlds there. Even with the flattening, which I think Relay also does, I'm not sure, again, if it does or it doesn't the same way that Relay does, that Apollo does. But from the point of view of like, kind of shifting between those two behaviors of like one big query or individual piece query that just runs, it's nice to be able to switch between those two behaviors without thinking about it. So that's nice.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And we have another question for you. You are popular. So Ro asks, what client-side GraphQL client does Hasura use internally?
I know I'm saying this on public record, but if you do quote me on it, I will still deny it, and I will say this was like a fake video. This was a fake conference. This wasn't me. We do not use a GraphQL client. We did not.
I laughed right over your line. Sorry, I'm from the States. People calling things fake is I just have to laugh through that. Please. Please say your answer without me laughing over you. That's good.
We don't use a GraphQL client. And we haven't one for a long time. And this was because of where Hasura came from. We kind of invented our own version of GraphQL. It was kind of like, imagine GraphQL over JSON, right? Imagine like a JSON that says type query, fields, and then an array of fields, which is kind of like an uglier GraphQL, right? It was, we'd invented that before. And then we started, and so our client kind of does a lot of what a GraphQL client would do. It does a lot of that optimizations and whatnot. And because in GraphQL, queries are harder to compose. You need to compose strings, essentially, right? That's what the Relay compiler is. I mean, you're kind of composing strings, but with the way that we work with our JSON style queries, you can compose JSON objects. So it's easier in some cases to like compose and decide to do things. So we used to have our own kind of that data client, but now we are kind of on track to move towards Relay. So for our data dashboard, it was so complicated that moving to GraphQL client did not actually make sense. But then as we did Relay and as we're adding Relay support, our kind of console dashboard will also move to Relay in all likelihood over the next few weeks.
Awesome. Excellent. Thank you so much for that information. Well, Tanmay, great presentation. Thanks for bringing Drake, by the way. I know that was a serious plug. And then you work with Hasura, which is one of our sponsors, which we thanked a couple of slides back. So thanks so much. Fantastic work. And what I want to say now is you could reach out and you could speak with Tanmay in the Q&A speakers room if you have a paid subscription. So definitely take advantage of that. So that would be great. And we'll be coming back. Actually, I don't know if your room's right now or if your room's in a little bit. But I know that there's in the main room, there's a break/workout with Kurt happening right now. So we're going to take a little bit of a break. And when we come back, we'll be thanking more sponsors. We'll be having more lightning talks. We'll be enjoying more of the wonderful React Summit. Again, thank you so much, Tanmay. And we'll be seeing you all soon.
Thanks, folks. Bye.
All right. Well, what's that you said? Can't tell us more about the... No problem. Our gold sponsor. And this is one that we actually use at Infinite Red, Shopify. So if you don't know what Shopify is, I'm here to go ahead and take that rock off your head and let you know. Shopify is a platform built for independent business owners of all shapes and sizes to start to sell, market, manage their businesses online in a store and everywhere between. So please go ahead and give a shout out to Shopify. Use the React Summit hashtag. And with that, let's get on to some more awesome lightning talks. So our next set is the hobby track. And the hobby track is going to be a lot of fun. So people are doing really cool and interesting things. I myself hope to grow up and become a mad scientist. So the hobby track's where the cool people are. Welcome to the alt track. Let's kick off our next 3 talks for lightning talks on the hobby track.
Hello everyone, I'm Hamza Hawi, mobile and web VR developer and founder of Hayo. As you know, I'm going to talk about virtual reality with React and how can we create new VR experiences using React 360 framework and run it into our web browser and all the VR devices. To get started, what is React 360? React 360 is JavaScript framework created by Facebook for the creation of 3D and VR user interfaces built on the top of React. This library is designed to simplify the creation of complex UI. And as you know, React 360 allows us to use the familiar concepts and tools of React and React Native. To get started, all what you have to do is install the React 360 CLI via npm, then init a new project and do an npm start to make sure that everything is going fine and you will have your default project into your web browser. For the folder structure, we have the static assets folder, which contains our 3D objects files and the material files, sounds, images, videos, all the media files should be here. And we have the client.js file, and here where we create our locations and surfaces. And we have the index file, which is our main file. For the components, we have 4 main components. First, the views, which is kinda like divs, and text component, and the image component, and the VR button, which is a normal button but on VR. The most important thing on VR is surfaces. We use surfaces to render the 2D UI components, and we have 2 types of surfaces, cylinder surface and the flat surface. We have 2 angles, the yaw angle and the pitch angle, and every surface should have a width and height that should be given by the developer. For the locations are used to render 3D UI components, and we use the Cartesian coordinate X, Y, and Z, and at the end we create a new route which will help us to connect our surface to the app registry on the index file. As you see here, we have the Z axis, and here if Z is negative, the object will be on the front. If Z is positive, the object will be on the back. And we have the X for the pitch and Y for the yaw. Here is an example. So here we like to add 3D object into our VR application. All what we have to do is importing the entity from entity. Entity is used to render the 3D objects on React 360. We use here if you like, you will use the ambient light for the light intensity, and we use the source to give the link to our object. Here our object have two extensions, the object and the material, and we can style it as you see here. We have transforms and too many options to style our 3D object. If you like to run this application on your web browser, just scan the following QR code and you will have this application on your phone or your web browser, on computer, on any VR device. And now we will move to the code. Let's see what we have. Here is what it looks like. It's similar to React Native and React as you see here. We use the Flexbox for the styling, and we have the client file. As you see here, we have a new surface, and we give it a root, which is a slide root. And if you go to the index file, you will see here we have the app registry with the slide root and the class name, which is slides. Where is? Here it is. And for the 3D objects, we have model, the model class, and as you see here, we have the entity object with an asset, which is a Porsche car, and we give it texture, which is a default image that we have here. So let's run it into our web browser. Just do localhost and run it and wait until it's fresh. And here we are in our React 360 application. As you see here, we have the slides, and we can change between them. We can move. We have video here, and we have we can change our background image.
About 2 or 3 years ago, no, it's like 4 years ago. But every time I actually try to do a small update and try to see, hey.
I think it's all what you have to know about React 360 to get started. For further questions or help, just contact me on Twitter or GitHub, Facebook, email, and thank you for watching. I hope that you enjoyed the talk, and thank you for everything. Bye.
So thank you for having me in React Summit 2020 Remote Edition. I'm super excited to be here, and today I'll be talking about my journey of learning React. How do I go, about things in learning React? How do I learn things at present as well whenever I'm stuck? So I'll be discussing about that. So my name is Tathagat Thapliyal, and I work at Coding Blocks as a product engineer and instructor for React.js and Node.js. So we at Coding Blocks are basically bridging the gap between the industries and the professionals, or you can say college students. We teach them, basic computer science stuff like Android, web development, machine learning, data science. We prepare students for cracking big wigs like Google, Amazon, Microsoft, and we are basically doing this. So I develop products and teach students for React and Node over there, right? So this is about myself, and so I'll be starting with my journey in React. How did I get into this field? How did I actually get into the field of full stack basically? So as you all know, React is a front-end UI library, which is very popular these days, definitely, right? So, so my journey. So basically, I'm a student, undergrad student at present. I'm pursuing my bachelor's of computer engineering. I'm not yet graduated. I'll be graduating this year. So, so I'm a student, and 1.5 year back, I was, actually zero in full stack domain. I did not, actually knew anything about what is full stack, what is web development, what is development to be precise. So I started my journey. I begin with the very basic stuff like HTML, CSS, which like every developer do. So I started with those things. Then ultimately I chose React. I chose to learn this UI library. The reasons were definitely popularity. Many applications using React.js. So I was able to learn React, and I was able to start it. So that was the initial point where I did not know anything about React.js. So I went through multiple phases. So I'll be discussing them over here, and I think that will help you all to actually learn some any tech stack. So why and how to learn React is a very important question which should come in your mind whenever you start anything. So why and how to learn X is any tech stack. So why should you learn any tech stack is a very important question. You should every time have a use case in your mind. You should have a use case of any tech stack you're learning. You should know why you're learning that particular tech stack, not because it is popular, not because it has a very high paying job, or majority of the jobs are of that particular tech stack. That is not a right way to learn any tech stack. So React has basically not that steep learning curve, but yeah, there is a bit learning curve involved in React. So you need to actually follow a step-by-step process, and that is true for any tech stack. So follow a step-by-step process. The most important thing a developer should have is patience. Have patience. So that is the one most important thing which I like about developers. They have patience, and they should have patience if they want to learn anything, and if they want to be a good developer, right? So follow things step by step. There's no shortcut to learn anything. There's no easy, or there is easy ways, but there are no shortcuts to learn anything. So you should follow a step by step approach, and you have to follow it, right? So once you follow the step by step approach, you'll definitely learn that particular thing. And most important thing which we and I also did was, please never mess up any other tech stack along with the thing which you are learning. For example, React in this case. So don't mess any maybe upcoming stack or very popular tech stack with React, because there will be a time when you are not sure whether you are writing confusing code or you have a dumb team. So be sure about your code. Don't mess up things. Don't mess up React and maybe like TypeScript. Don't mix them, because TypeScript is again transpiled back to JavaScript. So because browsers ultimately understand JavaScript, right? They don't understand TypeScript. So JavaScript is typed into TypeScript, and TypeScript is again transpiled back into JavaScript. So learning React with JavaScript should be followed, not with TypeScript, because again majority of the projects are using React and JavaScript, not React and TypeScript, right? So secondly, React Redux. So that is a very popular term which developers have heard. People have heard whenever they start with React. They think React and Redux are related, and Redux can only be used with React. That is not the case. React is an independent state management JavaScript library. You can use it with anything, but yeah, they are coupled together because they have a very good use case. So people start with Redux. So you should not directly hop into Redux. You should use the built-in state management of React. That is used most of the times, and Redux is definitely used whenever you have a large-scale application, right? So, but for initial learning curve, you should not pick Redux to learn state management in React. Then talking about React with Gatsby. So Gatsby is again static site generator, which is basically a very good thing to know, but actually it has its own plugin system, and it has its own learnings like the GraphQL things and all. So Gatsby on its own independent is a very good thing, but it is not a good thing to learn React, definitely, right? So these are some key points which I I follow, and I have been following them. So the first day which I decided to learn React, the first thing which I did was read the docs. I followed it also from very basics, and I built whether the Hello World application, whatever they tell me to build, I do that particular thing. So I learn with docs while doing. So that is most important thing. Learn with docs, and learn to do things practically, and learn to do them every day. So what I do is I keep a track on Waka Time. It is a very good tool. Most of you may be knowing about it. So Waka Time is a very good tool to keep your activity track of daily coding, right? So I keep a track over there. I stick to my plans, and then the most important thing is learn React in public. Now, what is public meant? Public means the internet, things available on the internet. So, for example, like this guy Chris, tweeted about learn React in 10 tweets. So he has a thread of 10 tweets in which he teaches something or the other about React, and it is a very good thing to actually read. I read all the tweets and all those 10 tweets, and they were a very good source of learning for me. So follow these people on maybe Twitter and Medium or somewhere else, and just see what are they actually sharing and what new things you can gain from them. And it is trust me, it is a very good source to learn. Secondly, so these were the some things which I use and have used in the past to learn new things, and whenever I want to learn something in existing stack, or I want to explore a new tech stack, so I follow those things. So I started with zero, and at present I work with these some of these technologies. So like I've been working with Node.js in the back end, basically Express.js, Happy, and in the front end I've been working with React, Ember.js, Vue.js, server-side Next, and GraphQL Spec, Redux. So these are some things which I work with, which we at Coding Blocks are using to build our product and scale them. So yeah, that is all from my side. A very short talk, but yeah, I hope you got something out of it. And I'm anytime up for a discussion on anything related to like operating systems, full stack development, like front end, back end. So I'm every time ready. I always feel energetic, and I'm always seeking for people who want to discuss something about maybe full stack domain or stuff like that, right? So yeah, you can catch me on Twitter, you can ping me, or you can find my most of the public projects on GitHub. My GitHub handle is there, given, and I write blogs as well. So not much these days, but yeah, I do write blogs and share my experience over Medium. So you can go and follow me over there as well. So that is all, guys, from my side. And once again, thank you for having me in the React Summit 2020. So yeah, any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer them after the talk, and I'll be available anytime, right? So yeah, thanks a lot. Cheers.
I'm Johannes, and I think in these weird times we all have one question. The question is what to do with that much time at home. I think there's one simple answer for that. It's to invent more board games and potentially use React. I'm a professional web developer at a weird tech startup in London at the moment, and I like to burn my tech money on publishing board games. And I'm going to give you all some advice or some tips if you also want to make some games in the current times. First thing, actually know a bit about the history of board games. I think there's one quote which you should know or be connected to. It's play is older than culture. For culture, however inadequately defined, always presuppose human society. The animals have not waited for men to teach them they're playing. And why is it relevant for us? It's basically saying, okay, we need to look as a game or as a play from a much deeper perspective from just the silly thing we do. So read Homo Ludens if you want a bit more background there. And so let's say you never invented a game before. What can we do for you? First rule, know the market, but that's much too capitalistic. Let's say, hey, know the history of games. and know what's going on at the moment, know what people like to play. Let's look into very popular current games, which would be, for example, on the left, Gloomhaven, on the right, Spirit Island. You notice some things about them. It's a lot of complicated fiddly rules because there's a lot of different pieces. And people might feel dumb because they don't get the rules, which are both very bad things. You want to make a new game, especially the first game, as accessible as possible because it's easier to test for you. It's easier to test it with other people. And in the end, I would even say these games are not fun. They're much more mechanical stuff. So, and what does this remind of us? It reminds us of jQuery and Spaghetti Code, but we are a React conference, so we want to look at easy games. Every rule one can cut is a good rule, is the quote for this kind of thing. It's by Sid Saxon, one of the most popular, famous American board game authors. So let's invent a simple game. What's trick number one here? Trick number one is don't repeat yourself, which basically means don't do the same game again, but it actually is to repeat someone else. Because what is very easy and accessible for a new designer to do is copy a game you like, copy a game you think which is interesting, which has some potential for even more, and then modify it a bit, modify it into that direction. This gives you a good base to start on, and it still gives you some freedom to actually be this designer introducing first own rules. So I hope all of you know this game. It's Connect 4, and you basically win the game by having 4 pieces in a row. So what could we do about this game to get it to this next level, put it into modern times? I made the simple decision of just rotating it by 45 degrees. Now, it's called diagonal 4, and the same rules still apply. On a player's turn, he's putting 1 piece into the board, but in this game, he actually has to put them from the left or from the right on top, and they fall down, and you still win by having 4 in a row. There's some extra rules we could go into some other time, but it's basically saying just flip 45 degrees, which introduces a lot more possibilities, and it's not as easily calculable by a computer. So we are also a tech conference. So how much effort would it be to turn this game into a playable version on a computer? Actually, not that much effort, because there's a great library called BoardGame.io. BoardGame.io is basically the Redux for board games. You just define your reducer. You have some initial state. In our case, it's just saying, okay, we have this grid of 8x8 pieces, and we fill up with specific stuff, and then you declare all possible actions. In this game, there's only one possible action because you can only put a piece on top in the row. So there's one action. There's some inserters you click them on. So there's some standard arguments to an action, which should all be very familiar to all of us. And there is some utility functions calculating valid moves, and some utility functions. Some actually wins because it's a game, some might win. It's relevant to check that. And then how do you make a visual? Because this is just a reducer. BoardGame.io is providing a pretty simple React interface for you. You just declare with some standard React code what your board looks like with any given state. And you can still use tables if you want to, because they're actually quite easy to put this game on the computer, and then use some CSS transform to rotate them 45 degrees. The question now is, why do you actually need BoardGame.io? What's cool about this? Pretty simple thing. Let's estimate how much time would it take to add AI to this. And it's probably a big estimate, but with BoardGame.io, you can basically just say, hey, I need 5 lines of code, or 4, depending how you count it, and I have my AI. How does it work? I'm just going to show you the video of the AI in action, and the AI is literally just this thing on my programming side. There's definitely some stuff going on in the library. Let's watch the video. So now the computer is playing against himself, and you see the pieces falling down. So what's happening? Every turn, the computer is randomly sampling one of the possible moves, and then playing the game out depending on that move. So it's basically starting a tree for some of the possible moves, and then checking who is more likely to win in the end. And for every of these trees, there's the probabilities of a win or of loss is calculated, and there's some configuration. You can say how many iterations, how many player deaths you want to go. And now you see the computer playing here, and red is actually putting blue into its Zwickmühle because blue is forced to play specific stones, but red has 4 pieces in a row now. So that is the full AI for this game. And you just get this out of the box with BoardGame.io by just providing a reducer and the actions. You get everything for free. Why is it important? If you make an abstract game, you always need to check that there is not one winner. There needs to be, in all situations, there needs to be some variability, even if the computer plays. So actually programming is a great thing to check. And what's even more interesting, are games a computer can't simulate, because there's so much more happening with a board game on the table. All the social interaction, you can't model that, but we don't have time for that today, so that's left as an exercise for the reader. If you want to know more, check out BoardGame.io, and if you want to see some of my games, check out kronbergerspiele.de or hit me up at Chaos Yoga.
Did that.
1.
Awesome. Well, we had some fantastic speakers there, and I hope that you all got to enjoy that. And will our speakers please join me on the Q&A stage? Just anytime. Y'all are just sitting around. That's not joining me at all. Come on, we'll walk up here. Well, thank you so much for sharing your adventures, everyone. Everybody from around the world, which is one of the benefits of having a remote conference like this. It's part of our journey, like to Thaget, right? You were starting your journey here, kind of sharing that story with us. Thank you so much for that. Just quick question for you. What would you suggest for someone starting their own journey? Like if you had to suggest one book right now, just like the go-to book, which one would you throw out there?
So maybe for a person who want to explore, like JavaScript is a language which most of the front-end devs as well as the back-end people usually start with. So for that, what I follow is the You Don't Know JS series. So a series of 6 books, which I myself have read, and I have begun my JavaScript career from that particular book. So that book is a good one. And other than that, a resource which I follow over the internet is javascript.info, or the MDN docs are pretty overwhelming, but yeah, definitely a good one.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. Absolutely. And and Hamza, you were speaking about React 360, where you get to do a cool demo for us, and with the teacher Q&A. How come we're not using that right now for this Q&A?
Repeat, just I'm not listening to you.
I was giving you a hard time. I was saying, if you have the teacher demo for questions and answers, we should be using that for a virtual conference. Yeah, we could have a 3D demo right now, but just kidding along.
I can share the screen if you like.
Yeah, let's do it.
Share screen.
This will give the folks in the fun booth over there, whether or not they're sharing this correctly, they'll be surprised.
I think here is the VR demo.
Very cool. Yeah. I love this. And Hamza, as I understand, you're doing all this on a phone when you're doing the development. You don't have an Oculus or anything. Oh, look at that view. Very cool. Yeah, I think that's what I saw. Yep.
Yeah.
Here's nice. I love it. Thank you so much for sharing that. Very cool. And then you have all the demos set up. I think it's let's learn.sapphire213.com. Is that correct?
Yeah. It's
very
a
awesome
domain.
Nice. Very cool. Awesome. And then of course we heard from Johannes, which, by the way, we're all locked up pretty much now. We're playing a lot of board games, right?
Hopefully.
And if you don't have someone to play with, you have some AI. So
exactly.
How's this whole board game thing go? Now I'll just let you know, if you're not out there, board games are strangely infectious. Like if you're just thinking of, the classic games, then you haven't grown up. I love playing board games so much now. I've gotten addicted to, I feel like I'm reliving my childhood. I'm addicted to board games and cartoons because I like watching anime now. I don't think I've gone anywhere in my life. So with how's the experience like that, and sort of like being in the board game world and doing all those hobby setups?
Well, maybe I should start the story with my family, because actually my dad kind of forced me into the board game business. Because
wow.
I'm the oldest of 7 kids, and my parents at some point decided, okay, we need to keep the 7 kids calm somehow, so let's make them play games with each other. And then we complained about the games not being good, because if you like look back into the 90s, like the children's games in the 90s were really not that good.
I know, right? Like what? Like the game Sorry? I don't know why. I needed that game for Christmas. I needed it. And then I got it. And I was like, this is the dumbest game. Sorry. But yeah, I agree with you. Like, what was coming out in the 90s?
Yeah. So my dad decided, okay, I'm going to do my own board games for my kids and for myself, so we have good games to play. And it's, well, been sticking to me since then. And now I'm making money with doing some tech stuff and burning it on making board games.
That's awesome. Doing things, making money with the things that you love, right? You get to code, you get to play board games, you get to learn adventures, you get to do React 360. We've got people here sort of like chasing their dreams, and I think that's really cool. Well, thank you all so much for being here. Let me see if we have any questions from the audience right now. I see people typing, but y'all need to hurry up and ask these questions, right? Like you've only got them for a little while, but fortunately enough, after this public Q&A, you can go jump into the private Q&A channels as long as you have a paid ticket and speak directly with each of our Lightning Talk speakers from the hobby track and get everything set up. So I'll say that actually it's a pleasure to meet you all virtually, as you're all around the world. As I understand, we've got Algeria, India, and Germany here. Is that correct? And I'm over here in the States. This is fun. Is anybody up like really tired right now? Just might be good. We have one question right now, and I'm going to ask all of you that, and then I am sure we'll go off to that. So what is your favorite board game? And Johannes, you know the answer here, so I'm starting with you. Or maybe it's the hardest question anyone can ask.
It is an incredibly hard question, because the game I want to play always depends on the situation and very much the people I'm going to play with, because like I have some friends who are going to play some big board game with massive rules, but I have a lot of other people are going to play something small, and I'm happy about each game as long as it's right for the situation. But single favorite, it's probably a German game called Lionheart or Löwenherz, also back from the 90s, by the same author as the other Settlers of Catan, Klaus Teuber, but a lot more like it's an auction game. So it's a bit more interactive, a bit more stable for competitive players, I would say.
Nice. And say it in German for me one more time.
Löwenherz.
Löwenherz. All right, good.
Yeah.
Now I can impress all my board game friends. To Thagat, do you have a particular favorite board game?
So I'm not used to play board games much. I'm more inclined towards computer games. Like I play CS:GO 3 to 4 hours a day. So yeah.
Nice. Yeah, and we have a Quake tournament coming up, so
yeah,
let's see if those skills transfer over at all. That'd be good. And that's coming up, I think, I don't know, not too long from now. And Hamza, last one here. So do you have a favorite board game, and is it real or is it just in VR where you're actually moving nothingness?
For me, I love strategy games, and I was playing CS:GO, but not for now. I'm just working on VR. So
okay, well, fair enough. Don't look. It's in the States, by the way, we call those gateway drugs. Do not start playing board games. Johannes is going to be like, oh, Lionheart, we'll just do a little game. Next thing you know, you've got an entire closet dedicated to board games. Don't do it. And then another thing, don't watch any anime. They tricked me on that one too. So don't start either of those things, and you will be very, very productive in React 360 instead. So awesome. Well, I'm sure people will have fun questions for you in your Q&A rooms. Thank you so much for being a part of the largest React conference in the cloud. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in and checking out these amazing people. Definitely reach out and follow them on all the socials. Follow them on Twitter. Keep up to date with what's going on. These are going to be people who are making changes. And then also, maybe next year, I'll be interviewing you. So thank you, everybody, and we're out.